A CEO walks into his daughter's school unannounced, expecting to catch her smiling with friends during lunch. Instead, what he sees stops him cold. His 7-year-old daughter, Grace, stands frozen in the middle of the classroom while an older teacher gestures dismissively at her. Other children watch from their colorful tables. No one moves to help. No one speaks up. And the teacher? She's not protecting Grace. She's the one making her feel small. He doesn't rush in to defend her. Not yet. He watches. And that's when the truth hits him like a punch to the gut. This isn't a bad day. This is every day. His bright, beautiful daughter has been enduring this humiliation in silence, carrying a burden no child should bear. That evening, John Taylor digs deeper. What he uncovers chills him to the bone. Complaint after complaint. Filed, documented, then buried. A pattern of discrimination so clear it couldn't be accidental. A system designed not to protect children like Grace, but to silence them. So, he makes a decision that could cost him everything. He's coming back, not as a worried father, but as the CEO whose donations keep the district running. The question that haunts him, will exposing the truth finally protect his daughter? Or will it paint an even bigger target on her back? I'd love to know. Have you ever witnessed injustice and had to choose between staying silent or speaking up? Drop your answer below, and if you want to see how this unfolds, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The October morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as John Taylor leaned against the marble countertop, watching his daughter arrange her breakfast with surgical precision. 7-year-old Grace lined up her cereal pieces in the perfect rows. First the granola clusters, then the dried fruit, organized by size and color. Her small hands moved with deliberate care, as if this simple morning ritual demanded her complete concentration. "Everything tastes good, sweetheart?" John asked, taking a sip of his black coffee. Grace nodded without raising her eyes. "Yes, Daddy." Her voice was barely audible, a whisper that seemed afraid to take up space. John studied her over the rim of his cup. The morning sun caught the natural puffs of her hair, pulled back with colorful beads she'd spent 20 minutes arranging. Her school uniform was immaculate. The navy blazer pressed without a wrinkle, the blue striped tie knotted perfectly. Even her white collar lying exactly flat. She'd checked her reflection 3 times before coming downstairs. This wasn't new, but something about it made John's chest constrict. He remembered the day 6 months ago when he'd finalized Grace's adoption at the courthouse. She'd been so full of life then, asking questions about everything, laughing freely, dancing to songs on the radio. Her eyes had sparkled with hope when the judge declared her officially his daughter. That sparkle had made him promise, not just legally, but in his soul, that she would always be safe, always be loved, always be seen. "Want me to pack some extra snacks today?" he offered, already reaching for the granola bars he knew she loved. "Maybe those apple slices you like?" "No, thank you," she replied with careful politeness. "I have enough." John watched as she folded her half-finished toast in a napkin and placed it gently in the trash, though he knew she was usually hungry in the mornings. His instincts hummed with warning signals he couldn't quite name. The drive to Meadowbrook Elementary was silent, except for the soft sound of morning traffic. Through the rearview mirror, John observed Grace staring out the window, her small hands clasped tight in her lap. The closer they got to the red brick building, the more those fingers interlaced and twisted. Her shoulders drew inward, making her seem even smaller than her 7 years. "Hey," he said softly as they pulled into the drop-off zone, other parents and children streaming past. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" "Anything at all." Grace's eyes met his in the mirror for the briefest moment, a flicker of something deep and painful, before she looked away. "I know, Daddy." She gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes, gathered her backpack, and stepped out of the car. John watched her walk toward the entrance, noting how she squared her tiny shoulders like a soldier preparing for battle, how she took a deep breath before disappearing through those doors. The image stayed with him as he drove to his office downtown. It lingered during his morning conference call, nagged at him during budget meetings, and followed him through lunch with potential investors. By 2 p.m., John Taylor couldn't take it anymore. He cleared his afternoon schedule, ignored his assistant's confused expression, and drove back to Meadowbrook Elementary. This time, he wasn't dropping off. He was going in. and what he was about to witness would change everything. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for 11:30 a.m., the kind of meeting John Taylor never missed. Revenue projections, merger discussions, investors flying in from 3 states. His CFO had sent 5 reminder emails. But at 10:45, sitting in his corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, John couldn't focus on a single slide in the presentation before him. All he could see was Grace's face in the rearview mirror, those small hands twisting in her lap, that forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. He picked up his phone. "Cancel the board meeting," he told his assistant, already grabbing his car keys. "Mr. Taylor, we have investors. Reschedule it. Something's come up." 20 minutes later, John stood at the front desk of Meadowbrook Elementary, signing the visitor log with practiced ease. "Just here to have lunch with my daughter," he said casually to the secretary, who barely looked up from her computer. She handed him a visitor badge, and he clipped it to his suit jacket. Nothing unusual, just another parent surprising their child. The cafeteria was a cacophony of sound, children's voices bouncing off linoleum floors, the clatter of plastic trays, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. John positioned himself near the wall by a bulletin board, covered in construction paper pumpkins, far enough to blend into the background, but close enough to see everything. His heart hammered against his ribs. Then Grace appeared in the lunch line. Her shoulders were hunched forward, her eyes fixed on the floor. She clutched her lunch tray like a shield, moving through the line with careful, measured steps. Even from across the room, John could see the tension in her small frame. "Look, it's Grace with her weird hair again." The voice came from a table of girls near the front. They weren't even trying to whisper. One of them pointed, and the others laughed. Grace's grip tightened on her tray, but she didn't look up, didn't respond. "Why does she always bring that smelly food?" another child called out. "My mom says people should eat normal lunch like everyone else." John's jaw clenched. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. "Wait. Watch." As Grace moved toward the condiment station, a blonde girl in a pink cardigan walked directly into her path. The collision was deliberate. John saw it clearly. Grace's tray tilted, her juice box tumbling to the floor. "Oops!" The girl's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Didn't see you there. You're so quiet. You're practically invisible." The surrounding children erupted in laughter. Grace bent down to pick up her juice box, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't say a word, didn't defend herself, didn't call for help. She simply straightened up and continued walking as if nothing had happened. That's when John saw Ruth Webb. The teacher sat at a corner table, her phone in her hand, scrolling through something on the screen. She looked up briefly as the laughter peaked, her eyes sweeping over the scene. For a moment, she made direct eye contact with the situation unfolding before her. Then she glanced back down at her phone, took a sip of her coffee, and continued scrolling, choosing not to see. John watched in mounting horror as Grace approached table after table. Each time, the same pattern. Children shifted, closed ranks, suddenly remembered they were saving seats for friends who never materialized. Backpacks appeared on empty chairs. Conversations grew loud and exclusive. The message was clear. You're not welcome here. Finally, Grace made her way to a table in the far corner, the only truly empty one in the room. She set down her tray with mechanical precision, arranged her food items in neat rows, and began to eat in small, careful bites. Her eyes never lifted from her plate. Ruth Webb walked past that table twice. Twice. She glanced at Grace sitting alone, then continued on her way without a word. John's hands had formed fists at his sides. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to march across that cafeteria, to gather his daughter in his arms, to demand answers from that indifferent teacher. His feet actually moved forward. Then Grace's eyes found his across the crowded room. For a fraction of a second, father and daughter locked gazes. And in that moment, John saw something that shattered him completely. A tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Please don't. Please don't make it worse. His 7-year-old daughter, his bright, beautiful, precious child, was begging him with her eyes to stay where he was. She'd learned that speaking up meant more pain, that asking for help made you a bigger target, that survival meant endurance, silence, and making yourself as small as possible. John stayed where he was, but his heart broke into pieces. Grace returned her attention to her lunch, taking 3 more bites before carefully wrapping the rest in her napkin. More than half her food went into the trash can, and suddenly John understood why she never finished breakfast anymore, why her clothes had started feeling looser. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't children figuring out social dynamics. This was systematic cruelty, adult neglect, and a little girl learning to disappear because being seen meant being hurt. And it had been happening every single day while he had thought everything was fine. John sat in his car for 20 minutes after leaving the cafeteria, hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to turn the key. The October sun beat down through the windshield, but he felt cold. Eventually, he drove home on autopilot, missing his exit twice because he kept seeing Grace's face, that careful blankness she'd perfected, that tiny shake of her head begging him not to intervene. At home, he opened his laptop with every intention of working. The cursor blinked mockingly at him. He stared at quarterly reports without reading a single word. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that blonde girl deliberately bumping Grace's tray, heard the laughter, saw Ruth Webb scrolling through her phone while his daughter suffered 10 feet away. Sleep didn't come that night, and by morning, John Taylor had made a decision. He arrived at Meadowbrook Elementary at 8:15 a.m., dressed in his sharpest suit, carrying his leather briefcase like armor. The same secretary from yesterday looked up with practiced politeness that faltered slightly at his expression. "I need to review my daughter's student records," John said calmly. "Grace Taylor, along with any incident reports filed this year." The secretary's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. "Well, Mr. Taylor, that requires some paperwork and authorization from... I'm her legal guardian." John's voice remained perfectly even, "which means I have every right to her educational records under federal law. I can wait while you pull them." 30 minutes later, John sat alone in a small conference room that smelled of dry erase markers and old coffee. Manila folders spread across the table before him, like evidence at a crime scene. He opened his laptop and created a new spreadsheet: date, incident, response, outcome. The pattern emerged within the first hour. September 12th, Grace reported to counselor that children called her hair messy. Response: discussed personal grooming and appropriate school appearance. October 3rd, parent complaint from Mrs. Chen about her daughters being told to bring American food. Response: cultural adjustment issues, parents counseled on helping children integrate. October 10th, Grace told Ruth Webb that girls wouldn't let her sit at their lunch table. Response: suggested student could be more outgoing and try harder to make friends. John's pen pressed so hard against his notepad, it tore through the paper. Every single complaint from a minority family was labeled oversensitivity or cultural adjustment. Every resolution placed the burden on the child to change, adapt, try harder. Never once did the word bullying appear. Never once was another student disciplined. Never once was a teacher counseled on intervention. Then he found it, dated 6 weeks ago. Grace had gone to Ruth Webb about the hair comments. The teacher's documented response made his blood run cold. Advised that different hairstyles might help student feel less self-conscious and better fit in with peers. The solution wasn't to stop the mockery. It was for Grace to change her hair. John pulled out his phone and called the school counselor, a woman named Patricia Morrison, whose name appeared on half the incident reports. "Mr. Taylor, I'm glad you reached out." Her voice carried that carefully calibrated concern that professionals use when they want to sound caring without committing to action. Grace is adjusting as well as can be expected for a child in her unique situation. Her unique situation? John's voice remained steady through sheer force of will. "Well, adopted, different cultural background. Some children take longer to find their social group. It's perfectly normal." "What about the bullying?" A pause. "I wouldn't characterize it as bullying, Mr. Taylor. Children this age are learning to navigate social relationships. We encourage parents not to over-focus on these normal social dynamics. Sometimes parental anxiety can actually make adjustment more difficult for the child." The subtext landed like a slap. "You're the problem. Your concern is making it worse." John ended the call and sat in the empty conference room until the afternoon bell rang. His spreadsheet now contained 37 documented incidents, 35 ended with some variation of student counseled on adapting. 2, both involving white students, resulted in actual intervention. That evening, he arrived home before Grace got off the bus. He didn't confront her about what he'd learned. She'd been carrying this weight alone for months. He wouldn't add to it by forcing a confession. Instead, he watched. She spread her homework across the kitchen table with meticulous precision, each pencil parallel to the next. Every few minutes, she'd reach up to touch her hair, a quick, uncertain gesture that spoke of self-consciousness he'd never seen before. Twice she got up to check her reflection in the hallway mirror. The third time, John followed quietly. What he saw made his throat constrict. Grace stood before the mirror, practicing smiles, small ones, big ones, testing angles, expressions, trying to determine which version of herself might be acceptable enough, invisible enough, safe enough to bring to school tomorrow. His 7-year-old daughter was conducting market research on her own face. John returned to the kitchen table, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. The evidence was undeniable now, documented, systematic, deliberate. This wasn't negligence. This was a system functioning exactly as designed. Protect the institution, minimize problems, place the burden of adaptation on those who already carried too much. Grace had learned she was the problem, and the school had taught her that lesson with every dismissed complaint, every suggestion to change herself, every adult who looked away. But John Taylor hadn't built a company from nothing by accepting broken systems, and he sure as hell wasn't going to accept one that was breaking his daughter. It was time to stop documenting the problem and start dismantling it. John stood at the stove that evening, stirring Grace's favorite pasta, the creamy tomato basil dish she'd loved since the first week she came home. He'd added extra Parmesan, cut the garlic bread into perfect triangles, even lit the small candles she thought made dinner feel fancy. The kitchen smelled warm and inviting, but his stomach churned with dread. Grace appeared in the doorway, homework finished, hair still perfect from this morning. She smiled when she saw the table. "You made my favorite. Thought we deserved something special tonight." John kept his voice light, casual. He needed her to feel safe, not interrogated. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. Then, as gently as he could, "Grace, sweetheart, can we talk about school?" Her fork froze midway to her mouth. Her shoulders went rigid. "It's fine, Daddy, really." "Grace." John set down his own fork, leaning forward. "I need you to know something. Whatever you tell me, I won't be disappointed in you. I could never be disappointed in you, not ever." Something in his voice, maybe the crack in it, maybe the desperate sincerity, broke through her carefully constructed walls. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Her small hands started trembling. And then, like a dam finally bursting under too much pressure, the words came flooding out. "They say my hair looks like a mess." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Every day, someone says it. They touch it without asking and then wipe their hands on their pants like it's dirty." John's hands clenched under the table, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. "They hold their noses when I open my lunch. Even if it's just a sandwich, they still do it. Yesterday, Sarah asked why I don't straighten my hair like normal girls. She said I'd be prettier if I did." Tears streamed down Grace's face now, but she couldn't stop. The words had been locked inside too long. "They say," her voice broke, "they say you must not know how to take care of me properly because I don't look neat like the other kids. That maybe you don't know how to raise a daughter who looks like me." The words hit John like a physical blow. Grace hadn't just been enduring cruelty about herself. She'd been carrying shame about him, protecting him, believing that her suffering reflected on their family. "I tried to tell Ms. Webb," Grace continued, wiping her eyes with her napkin, "but she said I need to have thicker skin. That's just how kids are. She said maybe if I tried harder to fit in, they'd be nicer." John fought to control the rage building in his chest. His daughter needed his calm right now, not his fury. Grace's voice dropped even lower. "At lunch, I know which tables will say I can't sit there before I even ask. I can see it in their faces. So now I just go straight to the empty table. It's easier. Every morning, I practice being quiet, being small. If I don't make noise, if I don't take up space, maybe they won't notice me enough to be mean." She looked up at him with eyes too old for 7 years. "I pray every night that tomorrow will be different." But it never is. Then came the words that shattered John completely. "Sometimes I wish I looked different, Daddy." Grace's voice was barely audible now. "So you wouldn't have to deal with a daughter who causes so many problems." John moved around the table in an instant, kneeling beside her chair. He took her small hands in his, waiting until she met his eyes. "Grace, look at me." His voice shook despite his efforts to steady it. "You are perfect exactly as you are. Your hair is beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Your food is wonderful. Your voice, your face, everything about you is exactly right. You are not the problem. Do you understand? You are not the problem." Grace nodded, but John could see she didn't believe it. How could she? Months of daily messages telling her she was too different, too much. Too wrong couldn't be erased by one conversation, no matter how sincere. That night, he sat with her longer than usual, reading her favorite story about a brave girl who saved her kingdom. When it came time for prayers, Grace knelt beside her bed. "Dear God, thank you for my daddy who loves me. Please help the kids at school understand I'm not trying to be different. I just am." She's apologizing for existing, John thought, his heart breaking all over again. After Grace fell asleep, John returned to his home office. He opened his spreadsheet of documented incidents, but this time he saw them differently. September 12th wasn't just a dismissed complaint. It was the day Grace learned her feelings didn't matter. October 3rd wasn't just poor administrative response. It was the moment she understood adults wouldn't protect her. October 10th wasn't just bad advice. It was when she accepted that she was the problem. Every uneaten lunch represented pain she'd swallowed. Every careful movement was armor she'd learned to wear. Every quiet moment was a piece of herself she'd sacrificed, hoping it would be enough to keep her safe. It hadn't been enough. It would never be enough. Because the system wasn't designed to protect children like Grace. It was designed to make them invisible. But John Taylor had spent his career refusing to accept broken systems. And watching his daughter apologize to God for being herself was the final straw. This ended now. The monthly PTA meeting took place in the school library on a Tuesday evening, rows of chairs arranged before a presentation screen. John arrived early, taking a seat in the middle section where he could observe without drawing attention. Parents filtered in, mostly mothers, a handful of fathers, everyone clutching coffee cups and looking vaguely tired. Principal Stevens took the podium at 7 o'clock sharp, her smile professionally warm, her blazer perfectly pressed. "Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to share some exciting updates about our school community." The PowerPoint presentation began with charts and graphs, test scores trending upward. 98% of families report satisfaction with our school environment. A slide featuring smiling children of various ethnicities, clearly from the stock photo folder. Our diversity initiatives have been recognized at the district level. We're incredibly proud of the inclusive culture we've built here at Meadowbrook. John's jaw tightened. 15 minutes into the meeting, during the open forum section, a black woman in the third row stood up. John recognized her from his document review, Tanya Matthews, mother of Marcus, whose complaints had been labeled oversensitive in 3 separate incident reports. "I'd like to address something," Tanya said, her voice steady but careful. "My son has reported being excluded repeatedly during recess and lunch. When I've brought this to staff attention, the response has been that he needs to be more adaptable. But I'm not sure why the burden should be on my 9-year-old to adapt to being treated poorly." A few other minority parents nodded quietly. No one else spoke up. Principal Stevens' smile never faltered. "We appreciate your perspective, Mrs. Matthews. These are complex situations that really require more nuanced discussion. Perhaps we could meet privately after this meeting to talk through the specifics." "I've met privately 3 times. And we'll absolutely continue that conversation. Now, moving on to our fall fundraiser plans." John watched the practiced choreography. Isolate, minimize, move forward. Tanya's concerns were noted in the meeting minutes, but fundamentally dismissed. The other parents who'd been nodding said nothing, having learned that speaking up meant being patronized and then ignored. This was how the machine worked. The next morning, John sat across from Principal Stevens in her office. Framed certificates lined the walls, awards for educational excellence, diversity recognition, community leadership. Stevens folded her hands on her desk, her expression one of practiced empathy. Mr. Taylor, I want you to know we're aware Grace is having some social adjustment challenges. These transitions can be difficult for children, especially— She's being bullied, John interrupted, his voice level, daily, while staff members watch and do nothing. Stephen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. That's quite an accusation, Mr. Taylor. Our teachers are highly trained professionals with years of experience. I have documentation. John pulled out his folder. 37 incidents, 35 dismissed. We've been monitoring the situation very carefully. Stevens opened a file on her desk, Grace's records. Sometimes children from different backgrounds take time to find their place in a new school environment. It's a normal part of the adjustment process. Different backgrounds? John's voice hardened. She's being targeted because she's black, because her hair doesn't look like the other children's, because her lunch isn't normal enough. Mr. Taylor. Stevens leaned forward, her tone patient in a way that made John's skin crawl. I assure you, we don't see color here at Meadowbrook. We treat all children exactly the same, regardless of their background. And there it was, the problem crystallized in a single sentence. As one of our valued donors, Stevens continued, shifting tactics, I hope you'll consider how publicizing these perceptions might affect the school community. Negative attention can impact enrollment, funding, staff morale. The subtext was clear. You have something to lose here, too. Sometimes well-meaning parents can inadvertently make situations more difficult for their children. Stephen's voice softened with false sympathy. Grace is already struggling socially. Do you want her to become the girl whose father caused problems? Children can be cruel when they feel a classmate is receiving special treatment. Stay quiet, or we'll make it worse for her. John's meeting with Ruth Webb that afternoon was no better. She met him in her classroom after school, arms crossed defensively before he'd even sat down. Grace is a sweet child, but she's very sensitive, Ruth began. Some children are just more thin-skinned than others. I watched you, John said quietly, in the cafeteria. You heard everything those children said to her. You saw her sitting alone. And you walked right past. I can't police every interaction between children, Mr. Taylor. There are 30 students in that lunch period, and frankly, kids need to learn to handle teasing. The real world isn't always kind. She's 7 years old. Your job is to protect her, not teach her to endure cruelty. Ruth's face flushed. I resent the implication that I'm not doing my job. I've been teaching for 23 years. Perhaps if Grace made more effort to be friendly, to fit in with her peers, she'd have an easier time. That evening, John's phone pinged with an email. Subject line, concerns regarding Grace's social development. Mr. Taylor, after our conversation today, I feel compelled to share some observations. Grace displays oversensitivity to normal peer interactions that may benefit from professional counseling. I recommend helping her adapt to school culture rather than focusing excessively on typical childhood social dynamics. Research shows that parents who overemphasize differences can inadvertently make integration more difficult for their children. Perhaps we should consider what's best for Grace's long-term social development. Respectfully, Ruth Webb. John read it twice, his hands shaking. The message was clear. Grace is the problem. You're making it worse. Back down. He closed his laptop and stared at the wall of his home office. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't oversight or understaffing or teachers too busy to notice. This was a system functioning exactly as designed. Protect the institution's reputation, minimize complaints, place the burden of adaptation on those already suffering. Minority families were consistently dismissed as oversensitive. Their children were labeled as needing to try harder, be friendlier, have thicker skin. The message was always the same: change yourself to fit in, because we're not changing anything for you. John had a choice now. Accept it and quietly move Grace to another school, or fight it and risk making her a bigger target. But watching his daughter practice smiles in the mirror had already made the choice for him. He wasn't backing down. Marcus Patterson's call came at 9:30 that evening, just as John was pouring his third cup of coffee he wouldn't drink. Marcus was an old friend from business school, now CEO of a tech firm, and serving on the boards of 3 private schools in the district. John, I heard about the situation with Grace. Marcus's voice carried genuine concern. I want to help. How did you? Word travels in these circles. Look, I can get Grace a placement at Riverside Academy. They have real diversity initiatives, not the performative nonsense most schools do. Actual oversight, trained staff, genuinely supportive community. She'd be safe there. John's hand tightened around his phone. Marcus, I know what you're thinking, but sometimes the best thing for our kids is removing them from toxic environments. You can't fix a broken system overnight, but you can protect your daughter today. I can make one call and have her transferred by next week. After they hung up, John sat in his home office, Marcus's words echoing. It was the easy solution, the smart solution even. A prestigious academy with actual accountability, where Grace wouldn't have to practice being invisible just to survive. No more tears, no more untouched lunches, no more prayers begging God to help her disappear. He could protect her immediately. Wasn't that what fathers were supposed to do? John pulled up Riverside Academy's website, scanning their policies and programs. Everything Marcus had said was true. They had counselors trained in trauma-informed care, strict anti-bullying protocols, a student body diverse enough that Grace wouldn't be one of 3 black children in her grade. She could start fresh, be herself, actually have friends. He reached for his phone to call Marcus back. Then he heard it, a small, sharp intake of breath from the hallway. Grace stood frozen in the doorway, her small frame in pink pajamas, one hand still reaching for the water glass she'd come downstairs to get. Her eyes were wide, devastated, locked on the Riverside Academy website still glowing on his laptop screen. Grace, please don't make me leave. The words came out choked, desperate. Tears were already streaming down her face. Please, Daddy. Sweetheart, I'm not. John started to stand, but Grace's words tumbled out in a torrent. Everyone always wants me to leave when things get hard. First, my birth mom said she couldn't handle me. Then the foster homes. Every time I started to feel safe, they'd say it wasn't working out. Her voice broke. And now, you want me to go too? No. John crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. Grace, no. I'm trying to protect you. By making me run away? Grace's 7-year-old voice carried an accusation that cut deeper than any adult's could. By teaching me that I'm the problem? That when people are mean, the answer is for me to leave? John opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no immediate answer. Grace wiped her eyes with her pajama sleeve, but the tears kept coming. I don't want to be rescued, Daddy. I want things to change. Not just for me, for Marcus, whose mom you heard at that meeting, for Aisha, who sits alone at recess, for all the other kids who get treated different. She took a shuddering breath, squaring her small shoulders in that gesture John had come to recognize. His daughter preparing to be brave. I pray every night that someone will see what's happening, really see it, not just fix it by making me disappear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I want to stay and be brave, even if it hurts. John knelt there, stunned. His 7-year-old daughter, who had every reason to run, to hide, to protect herself, was asking him to have faith in her strength. She wasn't asking for escape. She was asking for justice. You're right, he said slowly, taking her small hands in his. Running away doesn't change anything. It just teaches you that you're not worth fighting for. So we can stay? Are you sure? Because if we do this, if we really fight this, it might get harder before it gets better. People might get angry. They might say things. Sometimes things hurt because they need to change, not because we need to leave. Grace's words were simple, but they carried a wisdom that humbled him. John pulled her into a tight embrace. Then we stay, and we fight, together. He pulled back to look at her face. But I need you to promise me something too. Promise me you'll let me be brave with you. No more hiding how you feel. No more pretending you're fine when you're not. I promise, Grace whispered. No more pretending. They knelt beside her bed a few minutes later, Grace in her usual prayer position, John beside her for the first time in weeks. Dear God, Grace began, her voice steadier now. Thank you for giving me a daddy who listens. Please help us be brave enough to tell the truth. And please help the grown-ups see what's really happening. Please give me wisdom to fight for her without breaking her, John prayed silently. Please let me be strong enough for this. He stayed at her bedside long after she fell asleep, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her breathing. Her face looked so young in the dim glow of her nightlight, too young to carry the burden she'd been carrying, too young to have to choose courage over safety. But she had chosen. And now he had to honor that choice. The weight of the decision settled over him like a physical thing. This wasn't just about Grace anymore. It was about every child who'd learned to make themselves small, every parent who'd been dismissed as oversensitive, every complaint that had been filed and buried, every teacher who'd looked away because intervening was inconvenient. By morning, John had made the call, not to Marcus about a transfer, but to a lawyer about organizing a public forum. If the school board wanted to protect their reputation by hiding the truth, he'd drag that truth into the light where everyone could see it. His daughter had asked him to be brave with her. He wouldn't let her down. Marcus Patterson's call came at 9:30 that evening, just as John was pouring his third cup of coffee he wouldn't drink. Marcus was an old friend from business school, now CEO of a tech firm and serving on the boards of 3 private schools in the district. "John, I heard about the situation with Grace." Marcus's voice carried genuine concern. "I want to help." "How did you—" Word travels in these circles. "Look, I can get Grace a placement at Riverside Academy. They have real diversity initiatives, not the performative nonsense most schools do. Actual oversight, trained staff, genuinely supportive community. She'd be safe there." John's hand tightened around his phone. "Marcus, I know what you're thinking, but sometimes the best thing for our kids is removing them from toxic environments. You can't fix a broken system overnight, but you can protect your daughter today. I can make one call and have her transferred by next week." After they hung up, John sat in his home office, Marcus's words echoing. It was the easy solution, the smart solution even. A prestigious academy with actual accountability, where Grace wouldn't have to practice being invisible just to survive. No more tears, no more untouched lunches, no more prayers begging God to help her disappear. He could protect her immediately. Wasn't that what fathers were supposed to do? John pulled up Riverside Academy's website, scanning their policies and programs. Everything Marcus had said was true. They had counselors trained in trauma-informed care, strict anti-bullying protocols, a student body diverse enough that Grace wouldn't be one of 3 black children in her grade. She could start fresh, be herself, actually have friends. He reached for his phone to call Marcus back. Then he heard it. A small, sharp intake of breath from the hallway. Grace stood frozen in the doorway, her small frame in pink pajamas, one hand still reaching for the water glass she'd come downstairs to get. Her eyes were wide, devastated, locked on the Riverside Academy website still glowing on his laptop screen. "Grace, please don't make me leave." The words came out choked, desperate. Tears were already streaming down her face. "Please, Daddy." "Sweetheart, I'm not—" John started to stand, but Grace's words tumbled out in a torrent. "Everyone always wants me to leave when things get hard. First, my birth mom said she couldn't handle me. Then the foster homes. Every time I started to feel safe, they'd say it wasn't working out." Her voice broke. "And now you want me to go too?" "No." John crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. "Grace, no. I'm trying to protect you. By making me run away?" Grace's 7-year-old voice carried an accusation that cut deeper than any adult's could. "By teaching me that I'm the problem? That when people are mean, the answer is for me to leave?" John opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no immediate answer. Grace wiped her eyes with her pajama sleeve, but the tears kept coming. "I don't want to be rescued, Daddy. I want things to change. Not just for me, for Marcus, whose mom you heard at that meeting. For Aisha, who sits alone at recess. For all the other kids who get treated different." She took a shuddering breath, squaring her small shoulders in that gesture John had come to recognize, his daughter preparing to be brave. "I pray every night that someone will see what's happening, really see it. Not just fix it by making me disappear." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I want to stay and be brave, even if it hurts." John knelt there, stunned. His 7-year-old daughter, who had every reason to run, to hide, to protect herself, was asking him to have faith in her strength. She wasn't asking for escape. She was asking for justice. "You're right," he said slowly, taking her small hands in his. "Running away doesn't change anything. It just teaches you that you're not worth fighting for. So we can stay? Are you sure? Because if we do this, if we really fight this, it might get harder before it gets better. People might get angry. They might say things. Sometimes things hurt because they need to change, not because we need to leave. Grace's words were simple, but they carried a wisdom that humbled him. John pulled her into a tight embrace. Then we stay, and we fight. Together. He pulled back to look at her face. But I need you to promise me something too. Promise me you'll let me be brave with you. No more hiding how you feel. No more pretending you're fine when you're not. I promise, Grace whispered. No more pretending. They knelt beside her bed a few minutes later, Grace in her usual prayer position, John beside her for the first time in weeks. Dear God, Grace began, her voice steadier now. Thank you for giving me a daddy who listens. Please help us be brave enough to tell the truth. And please help the grown-ups see what's really happening. Please give me wisdom to fight for her without breaking her, John prayed silently. Please let me be strong enough for this. He stayed at her bedside long after she fell asleep, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her breathing. Her face looked so young in the dim glow of her nightlight. Too young to carry the burden she'd been carrying, too young to have to choose courage over safety. But she had chosen, and now he had to honor that choice. The weight of the decision settled over him like a physical thing. This wasn't just about Grace anymore. It was about every child who'd learned to make themselves small, every parent who'd been dismissed as oversensitive, every complaint that had been filed and buried, every teacher who'd looked away because intervening was inconvenient. By morning, John had made the call, not to Marcus about a transfer, but to a lawyer about organizing a public forum. If the school board wanted to protect their reputation by hiding the truth, he'd drag that truth into the light where everyone could see it. His daughter had asked him to be brave with her. He wouldn't let her down. The Central Library's community room filled slowly on Tuesday evening, the scrape of metal chairs against tile creating a discordant symphony. Parents filed in, clutching purses and folders, their faces reflecting everything from hope to skepticism to outright hostility. Teachers clustered in one section, whispering among themselves. School board members arrived together, moving as a unit toward the stage. And in the back, almost hidden behind a pillar, 2 news cameras set up on tripods. John and Grace sat in the front row. Her small hand gripped his tightly, her yellow dress bright against the drab chairs. She'd been quiet during the drive over, but her natural hair with its colorful beads made its own statement, a refusal to hide, to shrink, to apologize for existing. On stage, Principal Stevens arranged papers with meticulous precision. The school board members flanked her, their expressions carefully neutral. In the teacher section, Ruth Webb sat near the back, eyes fixed on her lap, avoiding everyone's gaze. Tanya Matthews arrived with 3 other minority parents, taking seats scattered throughout the room. A few white parents sat near them, allies, John hoped, but others sat with arms crossed, faces set in defensive lines, clearly viewing this forum as an attack. The school board president, a silver-haired man named Harold Chen, stepped to the podium at 7 o'clock sharp. Good evening. We're here to listen to community concerns about our school climate and student safety. Let me be clear, this board is committed to every student's success. The words rang hollow in the tension-thick air. Everyone knew what was really happening, the institution protecting itself. Principal Stevens took the microphone next, her professional polish on full display. Meadowbrook Elementary prides itself on our inclusive environment. We've implemented comprehensive diversity training, created cultural awareness programs, and established student support systems. She clicked through a PowerPoint, the same one from the PTA meeting. We've won district awards for our commitment to all students. Sometimes, in complex social environments, parents may misunderstand normal childhood dynamics as something more concerning. The subtext was clear. Nothing is wrong here. You're all overreacting. John stood, and the room fell silent. He walked to the microphone, his footsteps echoing. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at the faces before him, some hopeful, some skeptical, some openly hostile. I'm here as a father, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath, who watched his 7-year-old daughter pray every night to be invisible, who found her practicing smiles in the mirror, trying to figure out which expression would make her less of a target. He described the cafeteria scene in excruciating detail, every cruel word, every deliberate exclusion, Ruth Webb's passive observation. Some parents shifted uncomfortably, Others leaned forward, recognizing their own children's experiences in his words. This isn't about one child or one teacher. It's about a pattern. John nodded to his assistant in the back, who projected his spreadsheet onto the screen. The data spoke for itself. 37 documented incidents involving minority students over one school year, 35 labeled resolved, with the burden placed on victims to adapt, change your hair, eat different food, be more outgoing, develop thicker skin. Only 2 resulted in any intervention with the children causing harm. The visual impact was devastating. Even the defensive parents couldn't look away from the damning numbers. "My daughter asked to say something," John said quietly, reaching toward Grace. She stood, so small in her yellow dress, and walked to the microphone. John adjusted it down to her height. Grace's hands trembled slightly, but her voice carried clear and strong. "My name is Grace. I'm 7 years old." She paused, gathering courage. "For 3 months, I prayed every night to be invisible because being seen hurt too much. I thought I was the problem, that something was wrong with me." Her voice wavered, but she pushed forward. "But my daddy taught me that I'm not the problem. Staying quiet is." She sat down. The auditorium was absolutely silent. Several people openly wiped tears. Then Tanya Matthews stood. "My son Marcus is 9. Her voice shook but strengthened as she spoke. "He stopped eating lunch at school because children said his food was weird. When I complained, I was told I was being oversensitive about normal teasing. But this isn't normal. This isn't okay." As if a dam had finally burst, parents began standing one by one. Mrs. Chen, voice thick with emotion. "My daughters were told to bring American food if they wanted friends. The teacher suggested I pack sandwiches instead of the lunches from our culture." Mr. Johnson, a black father with barely contained anger. "My son was called racial slurs on the playground. The response from administration? Boys will be boys. They didn't mean anything by it." Ms. Rodriguez, tears streaming. "My daughter's accent was mocked daily. I was told she'd grow out of it, but only if I stopped speaking Spanish at home, as if our language was the problem." Story after story poured out. Different families, different details, but the same devastating pattern. The same dismissive language from administrators. The same teachers looking the other way. The same burden placed on children already carrying too much. Each testimony connected to the others like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. This wasn't isolated incidents or misunderstandings. This was institutional failure, systematic bias, deliberate looking away. The school board members on stage had stopped taking notes. Some stared at their hands. Principal Stevens' carefully composed expression had cracked, revealing something like fear underneath. And in the teacher section, Ruth Webb's shoulders began to shake. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears sliding down her face, finally confronting what she'd chosen not to see for so long. The truth was undeniable now, spoken aloud by a community that had carried it in silence for too long, and everyone in that room knew nothing would ever be the same. After the last parent finished speaking, a heavy silence settled over the auditorium. School board members shifted in their seats, shuffling papers that no longer mattered. Principal Stevens gripped the edge of the table, her professional composure barely holding. The weight of all those stories hung in the air like smoke after a fire, impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. Then, movement from the teacher section. Ruth Webb stood slowly, as if her legs barely supported her weight. Her hands trembled visibly as she walked toward the microphone, each step deliberate and heavy. Every eye in the room followed her. Grace tensed beside John, her small hand squeezing his so tightly he felt her pulse racing. Ruth reached the microphone, gripping its stand like a lifeline. Her face was pale, tear-streaked. When she spoke, her voice shook so badly the words almost broke apart. I need to say something." The auditorium held its breath. "My name is Ruth Webb. I'm Grace's teacher." She paused, gathering what little courage she had left. "Everything her father said is true. I saw it. All of it." Tears began streaming down her face, but she pushed forward. "I watched children mock her hair, her lunch, her voice. I watched her stand alone in the cafeteria day after day, trying to make herself invisible, and I told myself it wasn't that bad, that it would sort itself out, that kids just needed time to adjust." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I told myself I was keeping the peace, maintaining classroom harmony, but I was really protecting myself, my comfort, my convenience. Ruth's hands shook harder. Grace came to me for help, multiple times, and I suggested she change her hairstyle, her lunch, her approach. I made her believe she was the problem. The admission hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Because addressing it would have required me to confront other parents, to risk conflict, to have difficult conversations, to actually do my job. Ruth's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. I failed her. I failed all these children. I chose my comfort over their dignity. She looked directly at Grace, tears streaming freely now, and I have to live with that. Ruth sat down, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The auditorium remained frozen in shock, the confession no one had expected, least of all from the teacher who'd been part of the problem. Then Mr. Harrison, a fifth-grade teacher, stood. I've witnessed similar incidents in my classroom and done nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in social dynamics. Ms. Rodriguez, who'd spoken earlier as a parent, stood again. I'm also a teacher here. We're trained to maintain order, not to address these complicated issues. The unwritten message is clear. Don't make waves, don't create problems, don't do anything that might upset parents or require difficult conversations. Several other teachers nodded, some standing, all looking as though they'd been carrying this guilt for far too long. Principal Stevens finally stood, attempting to regain control. This is clearly an emotional issue that requires careful review and proper— No. Tanya Matthews' voice cut through like steel. She rose from her seat. No more reviews, no more committees, no more promises to look into it. Action now. She stood there, solid and unmovable. Then Mrs. Chen stood beside her. Then the Johnsons. One by one, parents rose from their seats, first the minority families, then supportive white parents, then more and more, until dozens stood throughout the auditorium. They weren't shouting, weren't protesting, just standing in solemn witness, a silent statement that carried more power than any words. We see the truth, and we demand change. Grace looked up at John, her eyes asking permission. He nodded. Together they stood, father and daughter, hand in hand. John's throat tightened as he watched teachers begin to stand too. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Rodriguez, others who'd finally found their courage. Even some school board members slowly rose from their seats on stage. Only Principal Stevens and a handful of administrators remained sitting, isolated in their refusal to acknowledge what everyone else could plainly see. No one spoke. The standing itself became the statement, power shifting in real time from institutional protection to collective accountability. The truth was visible now, undeniable, demanding response. Finally, Harold Chen, the board president, stood as well. His voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier platitudes. This meeting is adjourned. The board will convene an emergency session. He paused, looking at the faces before him. Clearly, significant changes are needed. It wasn't a victory speech. It was an acknowledgement of failure, and perhaps the first honest words spoken by administration all evening. As people began to move, conversations erupted. Parents hugged, cried, exchanged phone numbers. Some approached John and Grace with tears of gratitude. Thank you for being brave enough to do this. Then Ruth Webb appeared before them, her face blotchy and red. She knelt down to Grace's level, hands clasped as if in prayer. Grace, I'm so sorry. I failed you in every way that mattered. Grace studied her teacher for a long moment with those wise 7-year-old eyes. Finally, she asked the only question that mattered. Are you going to do better now? Ruth nodded, tears streaming. Yes, I promise. The ride home was quiet. Grace leaned against the window, exhausted but peaceful in a way John hadn't seen in months. Daddy, do you think things will really change? John thought about Ruth Webb's confession, about all those parents standing, about the board president's admission of failure. Yes, because you were brave enough to make people see. Grace smiled sleepily. We were brave together, and somehow that made all the risk, all the fear, all the difficulty worth it. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own moments when you had to choose between comfort and courage, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below sharing where you're watching from, Or tell me about a time you witnessed injustice and had to decide whether to stay silent or speak up. And if you want more stories that matter, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because tomorrow, I'll be back with another tale that speaks to the soul.